Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is Judy Knoblock. She is the author of 7 genealogy books, and she's here with Interwoven Lives. She is a 40-year member of the United Methodist Church in Glenview. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So what got you interested in genealogy?
You know, I've thought about that all week, and my dad was interested, my mom was interested, but, you know, life happens, and there was never a lot of time, but yet I knew some of the stories. So I went to work for a school district in the early 90s, and I suddenly realized I had the summers off, and this was something I'd always thought I wanted to do, and why not? So I started going down to Newberry Library at least a couple times a week. And then Mother had talked to me about little towns in eastern Nebraska. And I thought, why don't we go see these places and meet the people she talked about? So that was 1991, and from that moment on, I haven't done, it's been my avocation, I think. And I truly love doing it, and it just started off, and that's what I do.
I think one time we were talking before this interview, you mentioned that with the birth or arrival of your first baby, it was also a time.
Well, my dad had some genealogy his mother had written by pencil. So he took a typing class. Now, this man went out in the dark carrying a little typewriter to learn to type. Well, so he could type up what his mother had written. It was very rough. So when I was getting ready for the birth of my daughter, Dad gave me what he had typed up so I could type it up, and made it much neater and much different. And that was the stories of my grandmother, the Fox family, the grandmother who made this quilt. So.
And she is here with us in the form of the quilt.
Yes.
Yeah, and who is your intended audience? Because genealogy is kind of, right, you would think it's just one family or one line, but tell us how many, people you're...
Basically, you're right. I researched and wrote the books for the family. Most of them actually were on the Smith side, which was my mother's side, but because I had an aunt, and she's one of the names on the quilt, she wrote the book on the Fox Brown side of the family. So that has become my Bible. I use that book probably at least once or twice a month just to find out something. But what makes this book and this quilt unique is this was the first time that I had researched other families. And that made it an adventure, because a lot of the names on the quilt I did not know, and I had to try to find out, and it was a way to connect back with my community. And most of the time people were delighted to talk to me, to share with me, to give me information and photos on their family member that's on here. And I used, a lot of what I used on here was also the census, as well as obituaries from newspapers, and then just talking with the families. So it was fun. It made it a fun adventure.
If I remember correctly, you mentioned that as a result of your whole extensive work on genealogy, you have something like 1,000 people on your records?
No, I have 500 on a database. And see, what I tell people about genealogy is, yes, you need name, date of birth, date and place of birth, date and place of marriage, date and place of death, the names of the children, and all of that information.
That's a bare bones.
And that's the database. But so you see that, but if you don't write what they did with their life, then it just lays there. So that's why I think it's so important to write the stories. And that's what I do.
Yeah, get a snippet of who they were.
Yes.
So when I met you at the United Methodist Church, I had the sense from you that you're a detective at heart. How do you go detecting these, who these people were?
Well, some of the time I have found relatives who know relatives who know relatives, and so they will reach out. Sometimes I would take a name and try to go. Now we have Ancestry, which we didn't in 2009 when I did this book, but I can go on and see what they have to say about this person. Newspapers, there's a website of old newspapers. I can go on that. Sometimes county histories are wonderful. I had one argument with a family member about, I said my great-grandparents had a daughter, and she died when they got to this country, and they said, absolutely not, absolutely not. And I could not, so that was a challenge. I found a Missouri county history where her brother had moved to, and they had interviewed him for this history. He talked about the sister who died. Oh. So I was right. But so it's, you go many directions, and sometimes you find the unexpected, which makes it so much fun.
And you keep these little bits of clues until you find the right place for them. Mm-hmm. So Judy, in fact, what does your car license say?
My license plate says Sleuth 1, and people have said, well, people will think you're a detective, and I say, I am. I'm a detective because I'm searching out the information about the family, and for this quilt, the family of other people, and that's what I do. Yes, that's what I love.
A different type of Miss Marple.
Yes, yes.
Oh, but you have so many fascinating stories. But I guess let's ask a even bigger question. What have you found out about yourself that you didn't think about before you started this long journey?
I found that this has become a passion for me. It truly is what I love to do. I can get in the office and just spend hours checking out this, checking out that, trying to verify something.
The office, you're thinking about like county record office?
No, my own office.
Oh, your own office. Okay.
My own office. But another thing that I've also learned and found that, we have all this data online, but there is nothing like walking the cemeteries to find the graves, nothing like going to the courthouses, to the libraries. And one of your best sources of information that I found are the little town genealogists who love it. Mm. One of the friends turned her living room into a genealogy room and has all sorts of information. On some of the things I've found as I've gone along, families really did not want that information shared. And I feel that my goal is not to rip families apart and to put down things. And if people are really uncomfortable, sometimes I'll show them what I write, and they'll say, you know what, my mother wouldn't have wanted that. Mm. And that's fine. I don't put it in. One lady had told her brother, she said, Judy will return pictures. And so he felt comfortable sharing. So I wanted to build up, and I feel I built up some ethics while I'm doing this too.
Wow, that's a very interesting perspective, because sometimes we're so caught up with the facts that we're not sure where that ethic comes to play.
Yeah, and it's not to destroy people, and some families had one that maybe ended up in prison. And so I have a system on my database that I can keep it in, but there's a check that says if it's shared, that information does not get shared. I see. And I think that's important. You don't want to be rude and crude. You want to tell the stories.
Well, then comes to our quilt. How does this quilt come to be? How did you come across this?
Okay.
Yeah, this
Well,
item, this artifact.
the best part of this quilt is we know how it came to be because my grandmother who made it put here, pieced and quilted by Mabel Fox, 1929 Friendship Circle. In 1923, a group of neighbors got together for a birthday party and someone said, why don't we have a club? And for 7 years, they had to get library books from the state library, and they did book reviews. This group of ladies, they met twice a week. My grandmother named it as the Home Circle Club. And so about 1929, they decided rather than do the books, they were going to do the quilt. And that's why this quilt came about. My dad got it after his parents were both gone. And so when we were going through his things, I found it and I was very interested in it. And I knew my hometown of Big Springs, Nebraska was going to have a big celebration in 2009. And I thought, wait a minute, this is when I should do something with the quilt so that I can have a book to take home. And
Upon the 80th year anniversary, right?
yes. So I just decided it was time. Now, grandmother put only 3 family members are on here, and that's her mother, her mother-in-law, and her 3 daughters. But otherwise, it's people from the community and ladies from the club. There's only one young man on here, and his mother and he lived with grandmother and her family after she became widowed when this child was 2. One of the ladies is her high school friend from Nance County, Nebraska. Fullerton, Nebraska was where they graduated from high school. So, I think she just picked and chose those that were closest to her. What's really interesting about it is if they were her age, and club members, they were Mrs. But if they were younger women, like my aunt up here is Margaret Fox. So the younger women, their first and last name was put on, but the older women were always Mrs.
I see.
And so it's because that's how they did it in that days.
And you have so many clues on this one wonderful quilt.
Well, and what is even more interesting, I'm so glad you had me bring this one because this is called a star quilt, and I am sure that the star was made from the scrap bag. When you sewed, even in my day, you kept a scrap bag. And so this would have been the scraps from what they had made, which also then shows you what patterns and what colors.
Of that time.
My grandmother Fox and her daughter's white, because I'm sure it came from her own scrap bag. So it's just kind of, you think, oh, well, there's just a bunch of names, but then it becomes the story of a community. And the women of that time, because they pretty much had to make their own clothes. And probably, all of this is cotton, because that's what you could afford. So it becomes much more than just a quilt with names.
It's an artifact in this piece of them,
Yes.
literally. And so timing is everything. Tell us the timing of this quilt. Why was this so uniquely so?
Well, I think that when she made it, again, it's the history of our country. She made this in 1929, never knowing what these farm families were going to face in the 1930s, which was, of course, the Depression. And my grandmother and grandfather did struggle during the Depression, and by 1940 did have to move to Idaho, where one of their daughters was, and my my grandfather's sister and family, because they just no longer could keep the farm going.
Yes.
So never knowing what they were going to face, but that was a rough 10 years pre-war, pre-World War II, but it was a tough time on the farms.
Yeah, I would imagine some of those people might have left. Because
Oh yes,
of
there's
the
other ones also that ended up in Idaho.
But now you can trace where they were.
Yes, oh yes.
This
And
is-
actually, the one family in particular, when we'd go to Idaho, then we'd go to visit them also, because they were also, see, in the early 1900s, western Nebraska, where they were, was kind of the new frontier. It was a time, and my granddad Fox, Mabel's husband, he was one of the first to break up the sod in western Nebraska,
Oh, that's
because it was so
backbreaking work.
Yes, it was, and it was all new country. And interestingly enough, both sides of the family were encouraged to go to western Nebraska. They were eastern Nebraskans, and they were told that's where it was, where the land was, where it was the best to settle. So they all ended up, and that's how I ended up in Big Springs, Nebraska. But yes, that's how it happened.
So this quilt is like a book waiting to be written. Did you feel that when you saw this, you just knew there's so much to write about?
Yes, and I did, and some of the people I had never heard of, and grandmother did them in family groups. There's Mrs. Lichty and her 3 daughters were in the book, and we knew them. I knew them all my life. I still know the granddaughters, and some was a grandmother. Well, it was a mother with her 2 daughters, and then one of their daughters, and so she did them in family groups, and many of them, interestingly enough, were also associated with the Big Springs Methodist Church, which was, of course, my church at home. And now my grandmother Mabel did join the Methodist Church in Fullerton, Nebraska. But the church members found out that she liked to go dancing, and that was not acceptable. So when she found out that they didn't appreciate and didn't approve of her dancing, she quit. And throughout the Fox family, this Fox family did not attend church. On Saturday night, they loaded the pump organ and granddad's fiddle on a wagon and went to the neighbors' barns or granaries and danced.
How funny!
I know,
what a rebel.
But that's what they loved, and that's what they did. On the other side of town is my mother's family, who's taking their baths and shining their shoes for church. And I'm thinking,
Wow.
well, which would I rather be doing?
Yes.
And thankfully in my life I was able, my husband and I were square dancers, plus I was also able to be in church the next morning. So,
yes.
But it was,
So
so
how fascinating to learn about these kind of
I know it.
controversies of the time.
Yes.
And how people interpreted what's proper behavior. So that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, what do you enjoy most of your preparation work? I have a feeling is all the people you're meeting.
I do. I really love it. We have gone into little towns, and I've already found the local genealogist. One time we went into Iowa, my husband said, I think there's a stock car race in town. He dropped me off at this house. I had never met these people in my life, and he drove off. And that woman and I, you'd have thought we'd have been friends for years.
Oh.
And those ladies, the ones that really care about the local genealogy, are invaluable to we who need the information. That lady and I went to the cemetery twice that night, and it's getting dark, and we're back out at the cemetery. But yes, I love the contact with people, and And 99% of the time they're very excited. And but you never know. You never know what you're going to find. It's always an adventure, and that's what I love. You don't know what's coming.
And you tell me that you enjoy meeting cousins from all over the place.
I do, and we have gone and visited people across the country. I always let them know we're coming, but
Yes.
we've stayed in some interesting places, and I had a wonderful husband that was very supportive of this. But we did. It's been such a wonderful time, and I'm still always have a project going on. I just can't quite stop.
I can imagine how it can spread into 7 books. But can you tell us a little bit about Daughters of the American Revolution? You are a member.
I am, and one of the aunts on this quilt got very involved with it and loved it. And she, in the early 90s, she contacted, well, actually, she was just signing up all the women of the family. And so she contacted me, and I said, why would I want to be a member? And she said, well, it's a national organization, and it's research opportunities. Well, as a result, I have 9 direct line grandfathers that served in the Revolutionary War.
Okay.
I really would like that number 10, but it's a lot of work to prove it, except if you have a relative who's already been proven under that name,
True.
then that's easier. And so when it was time for her to do the paperwork for me, I had her go in under my mother's line because I wanted kind of the family. So I went under the mother, who my mother went with, then I went with it, and then Joseph Headley was our patriot. And then when my daughter joined, she also went in under Joseph Headley. So kind of a family thing for us all. But I think the meetings are excellent. I love the research part, but it's a lot of work, and you have to have proof. And there's a couple that I really wanted to prove, but there was just some pieces of information that we just could not find. So, but it's a very good organization, and I've enjoyed my time with them.
And small local museums have also a lot of information like this, or proof that you are looking for. Right?
Yes, they do, and I have spent many hours with some of those people looking at things. And Mother and I, on one of our trips, went to the Nebraska Historical Society in Lincoln, and she had told me stories, and I had taped her as we drove, and she told me the stories of my grandfather's siblings. We got into Lincoln and went to the newspaper section, and every story Mother had told me was in the newspaper. So I have it. I have official source,
yes.
And then we went to the soldier sailor home where one of the great grandfathers had died, and they said, "Well, do you want his wife's records?" And we said, "His wife? We didn't know there was another wife." And we had 4 wives. This was the 4th wife, and she married him for his $50 pension. So she married him in February, and by August he was dead, so she did all right. But so,
Yes.
you never know what you're going to find.
Yeah,
And that's the fun
so
of it.
many fun stories.
Yeah.
But Judy, cemeteries and courthouses are usually not the first places people go when they visit a place, as in like a tourist attraction. But you are a professional at going to those places. Can you tell us a couple of tips on what we're looking for when we go there?
Well, I think you need to know what you're looking for, what you want. And I know the most recent contact with the courthouse was I needed to have the information about the land around the courthouse, or the land of the relatives. And the lady...
So property.
yes,
Yeah,
the property.
records. Mhm.
And she was excellent. And it couldn't be, it was hard to read, so she typed it out for me. I mean, and then we went into Mount Carroll, Illinois, and I wanted a marriage certificate,
Yes.
and we just walked in to ask for that. And what we got was the marriage certificate, which I already had, but we found out that the Fox great-great-grandfather, she was 18, and that was fine. She could get married, but he was 19, and he was too young. So in order to be married at 19, they had to have his father's X, because his father couldn't read or write.
Wow.
So,
So,
you know,
Yeah.
and cemeteries, you usually try to have an idea of where the graves are, but we have walked many an hour through cemeteries, and I've been pretty determined that I was going to find the graves, and we always did, but it wasn't easy, and the ground is not level, and it's an adventure, but it's so worth it to have that information from the stones.
Well, thank you, Judy. You have inspired us to look into our family stories. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.